Doing well this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. It is 2 p.m. now. Really quick, before we get started, I just want to say go check out, after we're done here, go check out the video that I released this morning. It's pretty much a total rundown of what's taken place after a random person, a senior official who's anonymous, of course, as usual, right, has dropped some information, or really more so just a scathing article of unsubstantiated claims outside of acknowledging the character flaws we already know that that Donald Trump has. Like, oh, he's narcissistic, he's a megalomaniac, he's egotist. Like, okay, cool, whatever. Welcome to the 21st century. Like, most of our presidents have been that. But like trying to say that he should punish Russia for the Skripal poisoning. Yeah, I think it's Skripal. That even though Russia was taken out of the implication there, it was found out that Russia was not involved in it directly. Saying that they should be held accountable, that Russia should be held accountable, saying that we should not want to be friends with North Korea, saying that we should that's what the article said, essentially, saying that we should be more compromising with our allies, even though Saudi Arabia is our ally, and I feel like we've been plenty compromising with them, considering they've been waging a genocide against Yemen. So I do a total cover of that. In that video, we discuss Adam Schiff's comments about Trump's deep state paranoia. Also, we discussed the article itself and its content, and we also discussed how Tony Schwartz, who is the author of The New Deal, said that in that same CNN interview that Mueller actually plans on releasing 40 years worth of crimes from Trump, not his administration clearly, because he hasn't been in office that long, but from Trump, that's going to be released in 120 days. Ironically enough, just around the time that the midterm elections come. So go check that out once we're done here. I agree, Mike. It is more theater. In case you all did not know, Kauvenaugh has been a large topic of conversation over the last couple of days. And as most have noticed, the Democrats are back up to their old antics. As Mike S. so eloquently put it, it is more theatrics. They're trying to pretend as if they actually care whether or not Kauvenaugh gets elected. We already know that Chuck Schumer and the rest of the Democrats fast-tracked Trump's federal appointees for various judgeship seats across the country, literally so they can go on vacation. They were even about to fast-track Kauvenaugh, if I recall, at one point before they got so much pushback on it. But the biggest problem with what we've seen with the Democrats as far as Kauvenaugh is concerned is they haven't put up a fight really at all, up until people were just kind of like, yo, they gave Obama hell for anybody and everybody he tried to bring in office. You already lost Kennedy off the judgeship. So if you lose this, understand, because they're not putting any legitimate resistance, by the way. They're not, if you can tell, they're not calling him out, they're not calling out the simple fact that Trump was able to pretty much push through any Supreme Court justices he'd like, while the Republicans are demanding, hypocritically so, that the Democrats just capitulate to whatever Trump says needs to get done, although they did try and inhibit Barack Obama's ability to put in a Supreme Court judge based off of nothing other than the fact that it was Obama doing the appointing. So their resistance has been lackluster, right, to say the least. But there's actually something that's much bigger going on in the backgrounds that may not even allow Kauvenaugh to actually get appointed and then get approved by Congress and the Senate. And that is a case known as Verge versus the House of Representatives. Now, what does this case entail? It claims, rightfully so, that according to the Articles of the First of the Constitution, that the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, but it is concentrating primarily at this point on the House of Representatives, that it claimed that they do not have enough elected officials in office to maintain decorum. Now, what does that mean? It means that technically, according to the Supreme Court case, they can't even convene for Congress. They don't even have a minimum vote. The minimum required votes necessary to get anything passed through, to even convene to get a Supreme Court justice or even pass a simple resolution. They don't have enough. So essentially, what this case is asserting is that this particular Congress and potentially the next Congress, anything and everything that they do, whether it be the tax legislation that we saw passed under Donald Trump, the anything done to DACA, SNAP, any Supreme Court justice that it is or is not approved, articles of impeachment that may be introduced later on. Anything that gets done under the 115th Congress and potentially the 116th will be nullified. And not only will it be nullified, but we will actually see a sweep of special elections across the board. We will have to have special elections, especially in order for the Congress to do anything. This case is been approved for oral argument to the Supreme Court. They should hear by tomorrow or next Friday what day of October this case will be heard. Now the Supreme Court doesn't reconvene until October, which is why it won't be heard until then. But this is a case that has been in the work for a little bit over a year and some change. But if you look at the details of the case, it's a pretty solid argument. They're using constitutional justification that said that when Teddy Roosevelt decided to roll back on the the powers protected by Congress and for Congress, that he was actually breaking constitutional law because the Congress would have to vote on limiting the amount of representatives per person, per district, per delegate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Congress did not vote on that. Teddy Roosevelt actually implemented a executive order that limited Congress. It was not done congressionally and therefore violated the Constitution of what was known as, quote unquote, the Articles of the First. So it's interesting to me that the mainstream media has not been talking about this with midterms coming up, with all the special elections coming up, with, by the way, the DNC fraud lawsuit being heard on the 25th, which you all are familiar with, more so maybe than this particular case, that Verge versus the House of Representatives isn't being talked about as one of the most premier deciding factors on whether or not Trump's entire presidency means anything policy-wise going forward. If anything the Republicans have done as far as the tax burden, the legislation with taxes, the approval of the military budget is another big one. Pretty much anything done within the last couple of years, and if this case rolls over in the 116th Congress, will be nullified. Going forward, do you know what that means? Because, like I said, the nullification is a key aspect, but what happens next is perhaps even bigger and more groundbreaking, because we will have thousands more representatives in Congress. Not a couple of hundred. It's not going to go from 400 to 600, 400 to 800. This will mean that we will have, the last time I checked, approximately 6,000 members in the House of Representatives. Do you understand how insanely awesome that would be? It would mean that lobbyists, corporations, et cetera, would no longer be able to buy out and buy off are Congress people. They can pay 150,000, 200,000 to one, 150,000, 200,000 to another. But when you got 16 people running for office, you're gonna be able to pay for all of them. And then when you have 16 to 20 representatives coming from one state into that house where they can hold each other accountable, you can't pay off all of them because it's more beneficial to myself to call out the person that you are paying because the base has now been so diluted. And you're going to see a legitimate mixture of corporatist candidates, establishment candidates, and then also legitimate progressives or the outlier non-establishment Republican candidates. And you're going to see them holding each other accountable. This was done in order to make sure that we cannot hold those accountable who are taking corporate money and therefore representing corporate interests. So this case reverses that. And it was done so that Teddy Roosevelt can get the Federal Reserve implemented, by the way. That's why it was done. Because Congress was never going to approve of it. It lets you know how psyched we should be that the Federal Reserve is still allowed to determine our economy. So Pat, like I just discussed, it's set for the docket. It's already on the docket. They'll find out on Friday, either this Friday or next Friday, according to the people who created the case, whether or not it'll be heard in early October or late October. At that point, from there, we will hopefully have a decision made within the next month, shortly after it's heard. And that would be a crucial either victory for our democracy and for the people, or blow to our democracy, because it essentially means that even our Supreme Court justices are not as constitutional as they pretend to be. So I would love to hear your thoughts about this, because the reality of the situation is, this is the biggest case outside of the DNC fraud lawsuit that is going on right now. And unfortunately, it is one of the least talked about. And it's just like the DNC fraud lawsuit. The reason the DNC fraud lawsuit is not talked about in the fashion that it should be discussed in by the mainstream media is because of how dangerous it is to the status quo of the mainstream establishment. And this case, this Verge versus the House of Representatives case, is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, because it totally reshapes the conversation that we have about our representatives. It gives people hope to run for office and actually believe that they'll have a chance to win. They'll get to knock on, we're entering a revolution in politics. And it isn't just progressive. It isn't just, conservative. It is a populist revolution where people are tired of having to debate whether or not we should go to war. We want to be able to debate about, whether or not we should have 90% subsidies on healthcare or 100% subsidies on healthcare. Whether or not, we're offering too high of a minimum wage or just high enough of a minimum wage. Is it $20 an hour or $30? Like, we shouldn't be arguing whether or not, hey, should we be holding people accountable for election fraud? Should we be going to war? Should we be approving these ridiculous military budgets? Do we have to worry about our corporations buying off our candidates? Should we be concerned about that? These are absolutely obscene debates that we should not be having. But we have to have these conversations because our system is so corrupt. And Laverne versus the House of